We have some breaking news about legal matters involving Donald Trump, which involve federal appeals court procedural deadlines. Unlike any we have ever seen, we have an ultra high-speed appeal of a ruling ordering one of Donald Trump's lawyers to testify to Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's grand jury. The Trump lawyers have a filing deadline of midnight tonight in the federal appeals court in Washington, D.C., and Jack Smith has a response deadline of 6 hours later, of 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's happening right now tonight. And so the biggest legal development in the criminal investigations of Donald Trump did not happen in Manhattan today, as Donald Trump incorrectly predicted on Saturday. Donald Trump was not charged with crimes today by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, as Donald Trump predicted he would be on Saturday. Also, there were virtually no protests against prosecutions of Donald Trump anywhere today, even though on Saturday Donald Trump begged his supporters to get out there and protest what he said would be his arrest today in Manhattan. Protesters were out in Manhattan today, right in front of Trump Tower, demanding that Donald Trump be prosecuted for everything. More people turned out in Manhattan today to demand Donald Trump be prosecuted than the total number of people who have turned out in the entire country to protest Donald Trump being prosecuted. It was the biggest protest since 2019 in Los Angeles today by teachers and workers in the Los Angeles school district who haven't had a public protest like that since 2019. So, yes, there was protest in America today, but not to support Donald Trump against the prosecutors who are closing in on him. And the worst legal news that Donald Trump is living with at this very hour tonight is from Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's grand jury in Washington, D.C., investigating Donald Trump's possession of government documents, including classified documents, after leaving office. ABC News has delivered the most important beginning part of the breaking news of the night. Under the headline, Special Counsel claims Trump deliberately misled his attorneys about classified documents. ABC News reports prosecutors in the Special Counsel's office have presented compelling preliminary evidence that former President Donald Trump knowingly and deliberately misled his own attorneys about his retention of classified materials after leaving office, a former top federal judge wrote Friday in a sealed filing, according to sources who described its contents to ABC News. Federal Judge Beryl Howell, in her role as chief judge of the district court in Washington, D.C., had been supervising Jack Smith's investigation, grand jury investigation, until Friday, when her term as chief judge came to an end. The new chief judge is James Boasberg, who, like Judge Howell, was appointed by President Obama. ABC News reports that Jack Smith's office presented evidence to Judge Howell, quote, showing that the former president had committed criminal violations, according to the sources, and that attorney-client privileges invoked by two of his lawyers could therefore be pierced. ABC News is reporting that Judge Howell ordered Trump lawyer Evan Corcoran to testify to the grand jury without the protection of the attorney-client privilege, and that Judge Howell, quote, also ordered Corcoran to hand over a number of records tied to what Howell described as Trump's alleged criminal scheme, echoing prosecutors. Those records include handwritten notes, invoices, and transcriptions of personal audio recordings. Howell agreed prosecutors made a sufficient showing that on its face would appear to show Trump committed crimes. ABC went on to report, quote, prosecutors showed sufficient evidence that Trump intentionally concealed the existence of additional classified documents from Corcoran, sources said, putting Corcoran in an unwitting position to deceive the government. Evan Corcoran wrote a sworn statement signed by another Trump lawyer, which they gave to the Justice Department, in effect swearing under oath that they had turned over all of the government documents and classified documents in Donald Trump's possession. But when the FBI later executed a search warrant, they found more than 100 additional documents that were marked classified, including a classified document in Donald Trump's desk. After Trump lawyers swore under oath to the Justice Department that there were no more classified documents in Donald Trump's possession, the FBI actually found classified documents in his desk. If Donald Trump lied to Evan Corcoran and other lawyers working for him about his possession of those documents, then that is a very strong case of obstruction of justice against Donald Trump. The breaking news of the last hour, reported by Politico, is that Judge Howell's ruling is on an ultra fast-track appeal schedule with a 3-judge panel of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, with the Trump lawyers facing a midnight deadline for their filing and Jack Smith facing a 6 a.m. response deadline to the Trump attorney's filing. To many, that case involving the illegal possession of classified documents appears to be a more serious case than the Manhattan case about paying off a porn star to purchase her silence about one very brief sexual experience she claims she had with Donald Trump in a hotel room 4 months after the birth of his last child. But is it? Is it a more important case? If Donald Trump committed crimes with government documents, he committed those crimes after being president of the United States. The crimes Donald Trump allegedly committed in purchasing the temporary silence of Stormy Daniels were crimes that enabled Donald Trump to win the presidency. If Stormy Daniels had told her story about sex with Donald Trump 3 weeks before the presidential election, when she was ready to tell her story publicly, Donald Trump probably would not have won the Electoral College. Michael Cohen, acting on Donald Trump's behalf and at his direction, according to the federal prosecutors who prosecuted Michael Cohen, purchased Stormy Daniels' silence 1 day after this became public.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the...
Donald Trump's presidential campaign was in free fall in the 24 hours after that video became public. Republicans who had endorsed Donald Trump withdrew their endorsements that very night. Some of them called on Donald Trump to quit the presidential campaign and stop disgracing the Republican Party. Donald Trump, for the first time in his public life, was cornered into sounding apologetic and begging his voters to forgive what they heard him say in that Access Hollywood video. But Donald Trump hung in there.
I pledge to be a better man tomorrow and will never, ever let you down.
Imagine if the day after Donald Trump said that, Stormy Daniels had gone on television and said this.
I was like, someone should take that magazine and spank you with it. And I'll never forget the look on his face. And he was like,
what was the look?
Just, I don't think anyone's ever spoken to him like that. Especially, you know, a young woman who looked like me. And I said, you know, give me that. And I just remember going, you wouldn't. I was like, hand it over. And so he did. And I was like, turn around, drop him.
You told Donald Trump to turn around and take off his pants?
Yes.
And did he?
Yes. So he turned around and pulled his pants down a little. You know, he had underwear on and stuff. And I just gave him a couple swats.
By the time Stormy Daniels went public on 60 Minutes, Donald Trump was already president. The federal prosecutors who sent Michael Cohen to prison for facilitating the Stormy Daniels hush money conspiracy said that Michael Cohen committed his crimes in coordination with and at the direction of Individual One. Individual One was, of course, Donald Trump. The prosecutors said the conspiracy was designed to, quote, affect the presidential election. Without the crimes Michael Cohen committed in coordination with and at the direction of Donald Trump to silence Stormy Daniels, this country and the world might never have had to endure 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency. Something to keep in mind when you're trying to decide which of the criminal investigations and possible prosecutions of Donald Trump is the most important.